Hello and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs War Room Update. We're talking about the start of this war that in October 7, 2023. It's now been going on for 7 months, and we're now approaching in Israel Holocaust Memorial Day. This is a day which in Israel is really devoted to the memory of the Holocaust, seeing what we experienced, what we went through as a people, and where we've come out on the other side. It's generally a somber day, but also a day that gives not a small amount of hope. There is statistics put out every year of the Holocaust survivors who are still living among us, who can still tell that first-hand story of what actually happened. But what we're seeing at this critical time in Israeli and Jewish history at the same time is this inversion of the war that started on October 7, 2023. The Hamas terrorists and other terrorists invade from Gaza and massacre 1,200 people. They came with the express purpose of murdering as many Jews as possible. And that was their goal, to carry out almost as if they were coming to carry out the same genocide and to continue the work of the Nazis during the Holocaust. And while we're seeing that inversion of what actually happened on that day, we're seeing one of the main areas, the main forums that this is happening in is the legal forums. It started with a petition of South Africa, pushed on, we understand, by the Iranians to the International Court of Justice, claiming that it is Israel, by invoking its right to self-defense, that it is carrying out the genocide against the Palestinians. We've seen now just reports recently of considerations by the International Criminal Court. We're not exactly sure who, whether it's the prosecutor himself, whether it's other players, whether there have been other proceedings going on behind closed doors, possibly issuing arrest warrants for Israeli leaders on the claim that Israel is carrying out war crimes. This is something which we need to try and understand. And today I'm joined by Ambassador Alan Baker, the previous legal advisor for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and someone who played an integral part in writing, developing, and thereafter recommending that Israel not join the International Criminal Court for the reasons that we will discuss. Ambassador Baker, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Ambassador Baker, as you know, is one of really the stalwarts of the JCPA, and we have the pleasure of being able to really discuss these things very freely. Ambassador Baker, take us through your experiences regarding the International Criminal Court. Let's start there, if I may.
Okay, well, as a legal advisor to Israel's Foreign Ministry, I was a member of the delegation involved in the negotiation and drafting of the Rome Statute on the International Criminal Court. It was a delegation that actually it lasted various conferences in New York and various other places over a few years, which terminated in Rome with a very long conference at which we finalized the final text of the Rome Statute, and it was a very it was a very momentous time. It was the attempt to produce an international criminal court had been in effect since the 1950s, when a group of principally Jewish international lawyers, Shabtai Rosen, Yaakov Robinson, came together in order to build up a draft constitution for an international criminal court, in order to prevent the situations of impunity following the Second World War, following the Holocaust. This didn't go very far over the 1950s and 1960s because the Russians, the Soviet Union, basically the possibility of moving forward, and it only started to move forward again after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And then we had this series of conferences which culminated in 1998 in the Rome Statute.
So just explain to our viewers Just the basic idea. An international criminal court isn't something which is simple in its nature. Generally, criminal law and its enforcement is a national issue. Governments, countries set out their own criminal codes, criminal offences, and their national courts are then empowered to deal with those offences. Explain a little bit more about how the International Criminal Court works. Does it cover everyone, all countries and all people? Is it limited in its scope? A little bit more on that, if you could.
Look, first of all, it came about after several international tribunals were established following the war in Yugoslavia,
and the genocide in Rwanda,
I think Sri Lanka, and various other places. But these were specific tribunals just for crimes committed during that particular war or dispute. It was a judicial tribunal where they brought to trial these people. The International Criminal Court, as opposed to that, is a court that first and foremost recognizes and accepts the jurisdiction of each state to try and punish their own citizens or people within their territory who have been accused of and judged for carrying out war crimes, crimes against humanity, things like that. Only in cases where their own legal system isn't sufficiently open or isn't able or isn't willing to put these people on trial, then the International Criminal Court, its jurisdiction comes into effect, and they can then issue warrants and summonses for witnesses and people to come and be involved in an actual trial in Vienna.
As you said, Ambassador Baker, the idea that had always been prevalent before that was that after every war, or after most wars, there were a series of legal tribunals set up. They were generally tribunals set up by the winning forces that then put on trial the losing forces. As we saw with the Nuremberg trials, for example, that was the Allied forces, the Russian forces, whoever may be, putting on trial the Germans and the Nazis. And there were many examples prior to that. And then there seems to be this move in international jurisprudence to setting up not only ad hoc committees that would then implement the law and try those people who are seen to be criminals, but to set up this permanent body that would constantly be there, take away almost that idea of justice only for the victors or justice only for the losers out of international criminal law.
Well, these tribunals were established by the Security Council. As I said, ad hoc tribunals limited to the subject that they were dealing with, and of course subject to veto power and voting in the Security Council. The whole idea of establishing an international criminal court, a universal court, was that all the countries of the world will become party to this, and will be empowered to deal with the gravest violations of international law. In other words, not every little war crime or complaint, but the gravest issues carried out by the Pol Pots of the world, or the Milosevic and various others, and the question of the importance of the nature of the crime, the gravity. It's stressed in the statute that the gravity has to be the gravest crimes, not any little crime. And this was the whole idea, to establish a universal international tribunal, which on the one hand would acknowledge individual jurisdictions, legal jurisdictions, but on the other hand would ensure that the real war criminals and real purveyors of atrocities will be one way or another brought to trial, either through universal jurisdiction in individual states or through international criminal jurisdiction through the International Criminal Court.
This was seen to be, at least in my understanding, a very positive development for international jurisprudence, for international criminal law, that you have this court that would deal with, as you said, the gravest of offences. It would be there on a permanent basis. It wouldn't need ad hoc decisions to be set up. And really the statute of the court was meant to reflect that reality. Is that what happened in the end?
No. Look, politics gets into everything. And as soon as you have an international conference, so you have states being represented by their delegations who receive instructions, who fulfill the political requirements of the states that send them. So from the very beginning, you have a situation where any provision of this international convention is constructed of interests by varying states and compromises between various points of view. For instance, there were states that have the death penalty, and there are states that prohibit the death penalty, and there was a huge argument as to whether the International Criminal Court will be able to impose the death penalty or not, and the compromise was that it won't, on the condition that those states who have the death penalty will cancel the death penalty. So politics entered into the whole thing, and regrettably, perhaps the most political element of the statute was in regard to Israel. When the Arab states took the Geneva Convention, the Fourth Geneva Convention provision regarding forcible transfer of populations, and instead of saying transfer, they added directly or indirectly, intending that this will cover transfers carried out by Israel during, as part of its policy of establishing settlements in the territories. And this became a very large issue, and regrettably, because of this, and because of other issues regarding election of judges, for instance, the election of judges is based on the UN system. And according to the UN system, it's geographical groupings that appoint representatives or nominees to be elected. And Israel is not a member of any of these international groupings. So Israel,
never be on the
Israel
court.
would never have a chance, like it doesn't have a chance of being on the Security Council for the same reason. Israel would never have a chance of having a judge elected to the court. And the same with the International Court of Justice. When we tried to put the candidacy of Shabtai Rosen, perhaps the greatest world expert on the International Court of Justice, who wrote the Bible on the International Court of Justice, we weren't even able to get one vote in the Security Council.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So coming back to the issue of politicization, because of that, despite the fact that Israel was involved in drafting the statute of the International Criminal Court from the very beginning, and Israeli international lawyers took part, and Israel's delegation was composed of criminal law experts, Judge Eli Natan, who was a criminal law judge, a representative of the Israel's Ministry of Justice, myself, and various other members, including the retired Judge Eliakim Rubinstein, who headed the delegation at the opening of the conference for a few days. And we were heavily involved in literally drafting parts of this statute. And there are parts of this statute that we literally participated in the drafting. But regrettably, because of this politicization, because of this attempt by the Arab states to ambush Israel through the terminology and through abusing or manipulating the terminology that existed in international law, we regrettably had to recommend to the Israeli government that we can't become party to this convention, which was very sad, because the whole idea of the convention was based on preventing what happened during the Holocaust.
And if I understand you rightly, the way that the court works is that a country has to join the court. You have to join the statute. You have to become a part of the statute in order for the court to then use its jurisdiction towards that country. Just taking us now to the situation that we're in, and obviously a few years ago there was a decision by the Palestinians to promote themselves to the level of member state at the UN, 2011, 2012, and at the end they received observer state status, not full membership, and then in 2014 they used that recognition as an observer state to then join the court. Palestine isn't a state. Even the recognition that was given in 2012 by the UN for this observer state was really a fiction. So how can Palestine have joined the ICC?
Well, again, we're talking about politics, political interests, power games. Look, the upgrading of the Palestinian status in the UN from an observer delegation to a non-state observer delegation, or a non-member observer state, was, as you say, it was a fiction, but the Palestinians were able to push anything through the General Assembly. And this was a non-binding General Assembly resolution. Non-binding General Assembly, well, no General Assembly resolution is binding.
It's binding at all.
General Assembly resolutions...
As Ababen famously quipped, if Algeria were to suggest that the world was flat and that it was flat because of Israel, it would pass with 66 in favour, 3 abstentions and no one opposing.
And then the following years, it would be re-adopted by saying, since last year, we determined that the world is flat, so therefore the world is flat again. And this happens year after year, and this is the way the General Assembly works. Resolutions of the General Assembly should not be used to establish statehood. They're not intended to establish statehood. They're not intended to establish membership of the UN. They're not intended to establish membership of an international court. But the Palestinians used this, and they said, oh, well, if we're a non-member observer state, then we can take the word state, come to the Secretary General, who is the depository of the convention. In other words, he's the person that accepts reservations, accepts applications for membership, and it's a technical job of just determining if you're a state, then you can be a member. And the Secretary General of the United Nations accepted them. On the basis of this acceptance, the International Criminal Court, the then prosecutor and the Secretariat of the International Criminal Court automatically brought them in as a member state, despite the fact that the Rome Statute says that the court is open only to states. No. Now, everybody knows that there's no such thing as a Palestinian state. It doesn't exist.
Everyone's talking about it now. They want to push towards Palestinian statehood. They want to push towards the two-state solution. The Americans, the UN Secretary General himself is calling for this to be the opportunity, obscenely, to take the October 7 massacre and turn it into a win for the Palestinians to upgrade to Palestinian statehood. So how can they claim that they're a state already for the purposes of the ICC?
Well, look, they've agreed in the Oslo Accords basically that they're not a state. The Oslo Accords very clearly divide up the territory into areas A, B and C, where the Palestinians have got the Palestinian Authority, which is a sort of managing agency governing areas A and B, and area C remains in the hands of Israel. No issue of sovereignty, no issue of statehood. That is open to further negotiations on the permanent status of the territory. And these negotiations began at the moment in a limbo, but are still on the table. So if the Palestinians have agreed on the one hand that the territories are not they're not sovereign Palestinian territories, because the issue of who they belong to has yet to be negotiated, then how can they now come along and say these are Palestinian territories? And even more so, how can they come to the court and say we are not only a state, but we have sovereign territory, which is ours, when that sovereign territory that they claim has yet to be determined? They're trying to prejudge a negotiating issue, which is an agreed negotiating issue between the Israelis and Palestinians. Now, all these claims have been made to the International Criminal Court by various non-governmental organizations and various professors of international law and states who objected to the attempt by the Palestinians to address complaints to the court. And the pre-trial chamber of the court rejected these things and basically ignored them and accepted the fact that there is Palestinian territory without determining the issue of a border between Israeli territory and Palestinian territory. So the whole process shows the absurdity of the way that the politics has been brought into this issue without any legal logic.
That's the proceeding that happened in 2020 when the then prosecutor Fatou Bensouda approached the court and said, well, we have this state apparently called Palestine, but we don't know where its borders are. We don't know what its territory is. And she asked the court to define, well, what is the territory of the state of Palestine, which really is quite an oxymoron, because if you don't have a defined territory, then you can't be a state. And if you don't have the ability to identify that territory, then you certainly can't be a state. But so she asked the court to do that. And the court, without really any jurisdiction, if I understand correctly, then decided, well, the territories that were under the control of Jordan from 1948 to 1967 and Egypt from 1948 to 1967 will now become the territories of the state of Palestine, and those are the areas in which the court can then invoke its jurisdiction. So really they're saying in Judea and Samaria, in the Gaza Strip, where there's a war now going on, the court has jurisdiction there, and that's what they've been working on. And then the prosecutor opened an investigation. One of the things at the time, you and I actually submitted a joint document together with others where we explained that the way that the court works is by transfer jurisdiction. If the national state has jurisdiction to prosecute any person within its jurisdiction, they then transfer that jurisdiction to the court. The Palestinian Authority under the Oslo Accords never had any jurisdiction over Israelis to start with, so they really couldn't transfer any jurisdiction to the court. That was what we argued. That was also rejected by the court. One of these fundamental things that you see in any criminal trial is the argument of jurisdiction. Sure. Whether the court actually has jurisdiction, and so that has all been really rolled over, and now we're in this situation where there's discussions and what appears to be real concern that arrest warrants will be issued. There doesn't appear to be, on the flip side of the coin, there doesn't appear to be any real concern on the side of the Palestinians about the issuing of arrest warrants. In her original request to the court, even Fatou Bensouda, the previous prosecutor, was fundamentally, I think, anti-Israel and actively colluded with the Palestinians, including Palestinian terrorist organizations, said that the Palestinian policy of pay-for-slay policy, of paying salaries to reward terrorists for murdering Jews, could constitute an offence. That she wrote in 2021. Since then, nothing has changed, but there have been no arrest warrants for Mahmoud Abbas or any of the other functionaries involved in that practice of paying salaries to terrorists, which is clearly an offence because it's something which incentivizes and rewards mass murder and indiscriminately targeting Israeli civilians.
Look, as a lawyer involved in drafting an international convention, which is a statute of a court, it's obvious that if anybody claiming to be a state doesn't have legal jurisdiction over the population of the state, including over Israelis, because according to the Oslo Accords, the Palestinians, even in areas A and B, which were under their control and jurisdiction, didn't have any jurisdiction over Israelis.
Yeah.
So
and that was agreed.
It was agreed by the Palestinians. Now, how then can they come along and say, well, I now am going to give to the International Criminal Court jurisdiction over these areas, despite the fact that I haven't got jurisdiction? Now, if the court were to try and exercise its jurisdiction, they'd come up with the problem that Israel is in fact administering, at least in Area C, has complete jurisdiction, and in areas A and B, there's absolutely no jurisdiction regarding Israelis. So the court can't place itself in the place of the Palestinian of the
national state rights.
Yeah. Now, okay. Then we come to the second issue that you referred to of issuing arrest warrants. Now, look, theoretically, if the court has established the fact that there is a Palestinian state, then by the same fictional logic, they can also issue arrest warrants. But the question is, what damage will this do to the court? Because what the Palestinians have been trying to do ever since since 2012,
they signed the police.
Since 2012, since they tried to get a statehood in the UN, they've been trying to undermine Israel's legitimacy, and their whole aim, rather than to sit and negotiate with the Israelis and expend all their efforts to come to some type of agreement, they've expended all their efforts in trying to delegitimize Israel in the international community. And when they requested to become a party to the Rome Treaty and a member of the court, the reason that they gave was so that we can initiate prosecutions and referrals against Israel. In other words, not to advance the cause of international justice,
yeah,
to prevent impunity and immunity from trials, but to hound Israel. And this was the reasoning that they gave. And this is what they've been doing since then. Now, they've been trying to politicize the court. And to a certain extent, they've succeeded. If the prosecutor now, on the basis of that fictional logic, issues arrest warrants to Israeli leaders, but possibly also to Palestinian leaders, and Hamas leaders, despite the fact that the court legally hasn't got jurisdiction, then this would probably be the nail in the coffin of the International Criminal Court, because it would basically say, we have now become as politicized as the General Assembly of the UN, as UNESCO, as the UN Human Rights Council. In other words, we're no longer hiding the fact that we have become an anti-Israel organization. Now, this will be very harmful to the court, and I think the prosecutor is fully aware of this potential damage. He doesn't want this court to become the backyard personal tribunal of the Palestinians.
I think we just need to explain. I think to our audience a very fine distinction that you touched on. That's important to understand, because most people don't understand it. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, not the International Criminal Court, is an organ of the UN.
Yes.
It uses all of the UN's reports and reporting system, and it doesn't really have the ability to question any of those reports. It really has to accept them as is. And that's what makes the whole claim of genocide the South African claim very problematic because it rests to a certain degree on reports written by all types of UN functionaries inventing themselves that claim of genocide and adopting Hamas numbers for casualties and then adopting them as reality and bringing them to the base of the genocide call. Is the ICC the same, or does it have its own independence? That really it isn't and shouldn't be a politicized court as the ICJ is. It shouldn't be an arm of the UN. It shouldn't be subject to that political manipulation, both of the Palestinians and of possibly the other countries that are supporting them.
You're absolutely right. The International Criminal Court was established as an independent juridical body, independent of the UN, independent of any other international or intergovernmental or regional organization. Its connection to the UN, as I said, is based on the UN election system of judges, but also it has a link to the UN because the Security Council of the UN can refer complaints to the court. So there are various factors that link it to the UN, but as a matter of principle, the preamble of the Rome Statute specifically stresses the fact that this is an independent court. Also, the judges, in order to be elected, have to be commit themselves to complete neutrality, complete impartiality, and they have to be persons of high professional standard, known for their integrity. But this applies also to judges of the International Court of Justice, despite the fact that they're part of a UN organ. So,
but to what extent is that really possible, Ambassador Baker? Can the judges who are sent by their countries, sent by their states to sit on the court, to what extent are they really able to detach themselves from their political and national orientation? The head of the ICJ now is a Lebanese citizen. He has twice run for the presidency in Lebanon. Lebanon is at the moment attacking Israel,
and he's made statements
vilifying Israel as well.
Vilifying Israel, absolutely.
But he's now the one who's adjudicating, if we just switch for a second to the ICJ and the process that's going on there, absurdly accusing Israel of committing a genocide as opposed to Hamas and their genocidal acts. To what extent can he really detach himself from that background, from his national identity, from that everything that brought him to where he is today?
Well, he's supposed to detach him. They're all supposed to detach themselves, but they can't, because they're dependent upon the support of their governments. And there are only very few, I think perhaps the United States judge acted in accordance with her own opinion, her own conscience. But a large number of the judges represent countries that aren't democracies, and that send instructions to their representatives. And this again, this is the politics, which you can't ignore it. It exists in every field, in every sphere, and in every organization. With respect to the Genocide Convention, the South African claim, first of all, let me just say, for those who might get mixed up between the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, the International Court of Justice, as a UN body, is a judicial tribunal dealing with litigation between states.
Yeah.
It doesn't deal with people. It also gives legal opinions when requested by UN organs, advisory opinions, which aren't binding, they're advisory. Court established to deal with individuals who've committed war crimes, who don't have exemption, who don't have immunity, including the heads of state and anybody else. So that's the difference between the two courts.
Yeah.
Now, with respect to the South African claim, okay, the South Africans have given this claim, have put in this claim at the behest of the Iranians, with the financing of the Iranians, claiming that Israel has committed genocide. I don't know whether their advisors advised them what the Genocide Convention says, but it requires a specific intent, declared intent to commit genocide, which doesn't exist in the case of Israel, but it does exist in the case of Hamas and in the case of the PLO, where both of their charters specifically refer to the fact that their intention is to get rid of the state of Israel. So this is
kill the Jews.
This is a specific intent to genocide, but nobody considered initiating a complaint to the International Court of Justice against Hamas and against the PLO, principally because they're not states.
Right.
But their members are carrying out the gravest of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and in as much as it's possible to bring them to trial based on individual petitions to the court, which the court can accept, and based on the question whether the court has jurisdiction, then these people should be brought to trial.
So really, it sounds like there's a complete anomaly. The terrorists who actually carried out the genocide aren't subject to the jurisdiction in general of the ICJ because they're not states. But on the other hand, in the ICC, Israel is being dragged into that whole situation because the state of Palestine joined the court. So for one body they are a state, for another body they're not a state. In one body they can claim whatever they want, in the other body only. It would appear that only Israel is the subject of any discussion there. What would you say, Ambassador Baker, to the idea of? I know that there are different opinions on this. How should Israel and Israeli groups consider the ICC, the criminal court? Should we actively put in complaints to the ICC against the terrorists, against Hamas, against Mahmoud Abbas, or is that something which would be almost counterproductive, because our argument is that we shouldn't be there because they're not a state, and therefore the court can't have jurisdiction. But the court has already taken jurisdiction. So how should? What do you think Israeli organizations should do for the genocide that was carried out?
Okay.
Would you suggest going to the prosecutor saying there's Khaled Mashal, there's Sinwar, there's Ismail Hania, there's Khalil El Khaya, there's all of these heads of Hamas. Let's have them dragged in front of
and the heads of the PLO. Financing terrorism is a crime according to international law.
Without question, taking Mahmoud Abbas, all of the Prime Minister of Palestine, who's heavily involved personally in the payment of salaries, in the incitement, taking people like Ramzi Hamid, the guy who's in charge of the Palestinian National Fund, billions of dollars of untraceable funds that disappeared under Yasser Arafat, and now he's the confidant of Mahmoud Abbas, who's built up his own fortune. What would you suggest there?
Look, in order for the state of Israel or any governmental agency of the state of Israel to initiate a referral to the International Criminal Court, it would mean that Israel is then accepting the jurisdiction. And I don't think Israel hasn't done this up to now for that reason. But there's absolutely no reason why Israeli non-governmental organizations, groups throughout the world can't or shouldn't initiate referrals complaining against these people and accusing these people of war crimes and crimes against humanity. And the Constitution of the International Criminal Court enables individuals, enables anybody basically to issue of his or her own initiative a complaint, which then has to be investigated, and if found to be based on serious considerations, then an investigation is open. So all these routes are available, and as far as I know, there are a few organizations like Shurat Adin, Nitzana Darshan Leitner, who have initiated complaints against the Hamas leaders and Palestinian leaders, and I think this should be encouraged by Israel.
And also I think the International Legal Forum have also done that.
Yes.
Is there not a fear that this will be used? I personally believe that those complaints will possibly be used by the prosecutor to indicate that the Jews have accepted the jurisdiction of the court, have accepted the idea of Palestinian statehood, and therefore that can be seen as something which they can then be even-handed and say, well, we're investigating the Hamas terrorists, so we should also, to be fair, investigate the Israeli criminals.
But look, either there's jurisdiction or there isn't jurisdiction. The Jews aren't a subject of the issue in the court. The subject of the issue in the court is whether the court has jurisdiction with regard to Israeli territory, and it doesn't, because Israel is not a party to the statute, and whether it has jurisdiction over territory which is presently being administered by, on the one hand, the PLO, and on the other hand, by Hamas. Now, Hamas threw the PLO out, so even if the court claims that, okay, we have jurisdiction in Judea and Samaria, since the PLO have been thrown out of Gaza, then the court couldn't claim that they've been given jurisdiction by the PLO.
But that was one of the incredible really perversions of reality when the court made its decision to recognize Palestine and to recognize its borders. Even at the time, there was Fatah land in Judea and Samaria, the PLO, and Hamastan that was running Gaza. Now, if the head of the state there had effective control over that territory, which is what also one of the requirements to become a state, then really Mahmoud Abbas can't deny his responsibility for Hamas. But he says, well, they're Hamas, they're not part of us. He really, for those purposes, he makes that disconnect.
Fine. So then, in that case, any of these referrals by the so-called Palestine aren't representing Gaza.
Aren't representing Gaza. Could never have represented.
So basically, if they want to complain against about Israel in Judea and Samaria, they can try. They still haven't got jurisdiction because we haven't given them. They haven't got statehood. If they want to refer to Gaza, then if Gaza becomes the state of Hamas, and the state of Hamas becomes party to the convention, then they can try and claim that they can transfer jurisdiction over Gaza to the International Criminal Court. It's absurd.
Paradoxically, it would seem that Hamas had a more legitimate claim to statehood in Gaza than the PLO does have in Judea and Samaria.
Absolutely. Look, the whole thing is an absurdity. It's a huge dichotomy. There's no logical explanation to it, but it represents the situation, the politicization of the international community to such an extent that justice is not really genuine justice, and it basically puts international law under a spotlight of being to a large extent fictional, because the larger states can do what they want, and the smaller states are at the mercy of the larger states.
And here it would seem, as we opened the program discussing that it's Holocaust Memorial Day, it would seem that all of these really somersaults, tremendous somersaults, that the entire UN mechanism, that the court, the prosecutor, and the judges have gone through to really get to the conclusion that they can vilify the state of Israel, which is really setting now a new gold standard, as John Spencer, the head of urban welfare in West Point said, setting a new gold standard for warfare in the number of civilian casualties for every combatant, implementing precautions that are far beyond the requirements of international law, and yet everybody seems to be jumping through hoops to try and get to the point where Israel can be vilified and arrest warrants can be put out against Israeli leaders, and we can be dragged before the ICJ on claims of bogus claims of genocide. It seems to me to have that little, not even a little, that stench of just anti-Semitism.
Well, look, we're seeing today perhaps the most serious wave of anti-Semitism since the Holocaust, and I'm not saying that it's new. It was always there under the surface, whether right. in the United States, or whether in Britain, or whether in Germany or Italy or anywhere else. Now it's become modern and accepted and kosher to openly declare that I want to get rid of the Jews. It's an accepted thing, but it was always under the surface. It's just now it's become out in the open. But look, I can only come back to the genuine sort of noble intentions of the founding fathers of international justice, with their hope that ultimately, when it comes to the crunch, when there's a necessity to determine, and I'm not talking about determined by resolutions of the UN, but I'm talking about judgments or opinions of an international juridical tribunal, that justice will prevail. We can only hope that will happen. We can only hope that those same judges, who might well be getting instructions from their home country, will act in accordance with their oath of office to be completely impartial. Maybe I'm being naive, but this was what accompanied us when we were negotiating the Statute of the International Criminal Court. And it accompanied all those lawyers, international lawyers, who throughout the years genuinely wanted to produce a body which would ensure complete international justice without the insertion of politics. Whether it will happen or not, we don't know. I still naively rely on this fact that judges who judge are bound by oaths of being impartial and unbiased. We can only see.
Well, indeed, we will have to wait and see. I am fearful that that the idea and the desire to target Israel won't be something which even the prosecutor in the ICC can ignore. That I would assume that he's under tremendous pressure on the subject, and I fear that there is a real danger for Israel in this process, in the ICC and also in the ICJ. The ICJ at the same time is considering another advisory opinion on the illegality of Israel's presence in Judea and Samaria. All of these things all blend one into the other, with the same judges making the same decisions on different subjects, all relating to Israel, and all with that same basic underlying claim of Israel's guilt before it's guilty before it's been proven. Really, that the opposite of what it should be. Ambassador Baker, thank you very much for joining me. we have found a little bit of extra information, at least in our discussion. For those that would like to, you can obviously, and you enjoy the content of these War Room updates, you can subscribe to the JCPA YouTube channel and follow us and get the live updates. You're also more than welcome to push on the JCPA website. There's a little button that says donate. Obviously, all of our activities are conducted with the generosity of our followers and of our supporters. And so if you would like to become a partner in our work, that would obviously be greatly appreciated, so that we can keep on trying to bring these subjects and other subjects and really regional subjects to the forefront with the best experts possible. Ambassador Baker, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.